Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Ripple the Twine podcast. I am your host, Brendan Summerman. Tonight's episode is going to be a little bit more delving into the camp situation and training camp starting on Thursday. There's a lot to talk about in the Flyers country. At the moment, there is a lot more concern than hope as the Flyers announced today that Sean Couturier, after yesterday, that Sean Couturier will miss the start of the season with the team after having a herniated disc. The team is saying it's week-to-week delegation for injury, but according to sources and reports from other outlets, the Flyers are hopeful on the backside that Sean Couturier can return to 6 to 8 weeks. Anthony Sanfilippo of Crossing Broad first broke the news yesterday afternoon before Daily Faceoff's Frank Cervelli reiterated the news, saying that it will be at least 6 to 8 weeks for Sean Couturier, and if not healed after 6 to 8 weeks, he will have to have surgery. Now, Sean Couturier is, of course, out for training camp, but that does not mean there's more into the Flyers training camp. The Flyers will experience a new training camp this year under head coach John Tortorella, and it'll be an interesting concept of scrimmages, practice, and off-ice workouts. Now, John Tortorella was on the record for saying over the past few weeks that he believes there's more to issues to the Flyers on the ice before they can even get on the ice. And he believes that they need to work on their stuff off the ice before they can even get on the ice. And that's a big testament to what especially we have come to know for this Flyers team, as one of the big things that has been nationally known is that the team has some issues off the ice and in the locker room. John Tortorella is clearly focusing on that and taking the accountability strain for that very seriously before the Flyers even step on the ice on Thursday. Now, before we get into the schedule on Thursday, here is the list of players that are necessarily competing for jobs. There's going to be 71 players in camp. However, these players on the screen right here are going to be the main guys competing for those positions. As you can see, we listed it out between centers, wings, and then defensemen. The Flyers centers are, of course, Kevin Hayes, Morgan Frost, Patrick Brown, Scott Lawton, Tanner Lazinski, Jackson Case, and Cam Trout, Artem Anisov. Then you get into forwards, Travis Konechny, Cam Atkinson, Joel Farabee, who will participate in camp after recovering from off-season neck surgery. Joel Farabee was supposed to have missed 3 to 5 months back in June, but he has made incredible recovery and quickly recovered and should be available for the start of the season. Then you get into James Van Riemsdyk, Owen Tippett, and that's pretty much the veterans that will pretty much be competing and pretty much are locks for this team. Now, when you get into the prospects areas, Tyson Forrester, Bobby Brink, Wade Allison, Noah Cates, Hayden Hodson, they all 5 of those have a good chance to compete for a good spot, at least one spot on the lineup. Then you get into the more grittier Flyers that the Flyers have really focused on attaining to this season and playing a harder style to play against. Zach McEwen, Nick Delorier, and Antoine Roussel, who's also on a PTO. Now, Nick Delorier was one of those guys where I don't think it was more of a signing that the Flyers just went all above and beyond, overspent, gave him way too much. It was more in the lines of they basically, he's one of the most feared fighters in the league. And anybody that is going to go against him on a daily and a nightly basis knows that Delorier is going to be in the lineup. And that's the thing about it. That was one of the main points that they brought him in. Then you bring into the defense core. The defense core is pretty much already set. Ivan Provorov and Tony DeAngelo will be your first pair of defensemen. Travis Sanheim and Rasmus Ristolainen will be your second pair of defensemen. And Cam York and Justin Braun will more than likely be your third. And then you get into Igor Zamula, who has a chance. And then Ronnie Attard, who also has a chance. But the main point is that when you look at it, the point that they have here is the Flyers have a lot of good camp battles that will happen. And here's the point about that. the Flyers are going into this camp with very open arms, very open mindsets. And the main thing that John Tortorella has said to that is that they do not have, first of all, a captain. John Tortorella said he's not going to be naming a captain before camp starts. But also, this group is starting a fresh start with this coaching staff. And when you look at it, there's plenty of names in there that could take a veteran spot, but also could also fall to a veteran that is on a contract and on a tryout, or also somebody that is on a regular deal that may need some more time in the AHL. So there's plenty of opportunities here for not just somebody that is young to jump up into the roster, but also those younger guys to possibly take a step backwards if they get beaten out by somebody. And I think it's really set up perfectly that, the Flyers have a good mix of veterans and young guys. But as you can see on the screen, especially with the absence of Sean Couturier and Ryan Ellis on defense, the Flyers really lack high-end talent. And talent, it's pretty much anywhere you cannot find in this lineup. And the main point about that is that when you look at the top there with Kevin Hayes, Morgan Frost, and Patrick Brown, the Flyers really don't have a lineup down the middle. Sean Couturier and Kevin Hayes were going to be their number 1 and number 2 center. Then after that, Morgan Frost would have been a very good third-line center, and Patrick Brown would have rounded out the nice fourth-line center. However, now with Sean Couturier's absence, they don't really have another center capable of playing top-line minutes. Scott Laughton, yes, can play center, but the Flyers do like him better on the wing, which, when you get into it, is the same exact situation with Claude Giroux when Claude Giroux was moving from wing to center and always could go back to center whenever they need him. Scott Laughton could do the same exact thing. However, they really like him on the wing because he brings a little bit more tenacity on the wing. But could Scott Laughton be your second-line center this year? That's a very highly likely outcome to the situation where Kevin Hayes and Scott Laughton will be your number 1 and number 2 center, and then Morgan Frost and Patrick Brown will still be in their realms. But that does not stop somebody from like Artem Misioff, who was on a PTO with the Flyers, but according to sources that have later confirmed now via the Flyers management side, that he was signed before Sean Couturier got hurt. So there was no real connection there of the reason why they brought him in. Could he possibly take a spot away in the lineup? He's a bigger guy. He played in the KHL last year. He had some good numbers in the KHL last year. So he still has some game in him. And he also, one big thing about Anisimov is he played 3 years in New York under John Tortorella. So there's a familiarity there with the head coach already. But that's hearsay. And at the moment now, there's not really any definite answers until we hit the ice, probably on Thursday with those first groups. But we can't really take anything from those groups because John Tortorella has already came out and said that they will be rotating groups every single day. So there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching throughout the first 3 days of camp on Thursday, Friday, and on Sunday. The Flyers play on Saturday night. That's why there's no training camp on Sunday. So when you really get into it and you really start to realm around it, the where and how this is all going to come together is that training camp. It's going to be 71 players at training camp split into 4 groups, and they're going to be on the ice every single day, basically. All 4 groups will be on the ice at a certain period of time. And this year, it's a little bit different than normal Flyers camps where it was split into 2 groups, where one group was on in the morning and one group was on in the afternoon. This year, on Thursday, it'll be a little bit different. Every group is just going to be on for about 45 minutes just to get their legs under them. More than likely, it'll just be a hard skate from John Tortorella and those groups, working on basic things that he wants to see. But on Friday, this is where everything changes from a normal Flyers training camp. The Flyers will be on 2 split groups. Group A and Group D will go first on Friday, and then Group B and Group C will go second. Both of those groupings will be under the same protocol. They'll both start with a 45-minute scrimmage. Then they will both break. One will go to an off-ice workout. The other one will go on the ice and do their work for the day. Then halfway through the session, right around an hour, they will flip-flop. That the group on the ice will go off the ice and do an off-ice workout. And then the group on the off-ice will come onto the ice. So it's a little bit different than normal Flyers things, but The main point about it is, the one thing that's really stuck out to a lot of people at the start already, is that the Flyers have really focused on getting everybody in camp. And one of the main things is, we talked to Ronnie Howard last week, they were so excited that everybody got here so early that they all have been biting at the bit, doing workout drills, doing hard workout drills, doing scrimmages by themselves, that they've all been waiting to get this started. And I think the one important thing about this is scrimmages, because that's one thing that Flyers really never did, even back to to Dave Hextall back in that era, where they didn't even do scrimmages back then either. Alain Vigneault had one or two mixed in, but John Tortorella is going to scrimmage every single day. Every single player that is in the Flyers training camp will be part of a scrimmage every single day, which is kind of something that gets the blood flowing, gets the juices going, gets you in that mindset that you're playing hockey. Now, it's going to be interesting to see, especially of how hard some guys go, and especially how hard, some of the guys that are fighting for battles are going to go in those things. Because like Ronnie Howard said last week, you can only go so hard against your own guys. You know that you are going to be with them every day, and you don't want to hurt anybody. You don't want to get too serious with them. But it's also, some of these guys are fighting for real jobs here. And that's where one thing I think that you're going to see a lot of more physicality. You're going to see a lot of more anxiety and different types of anger and different types of energy levels that are going to be showcased by different Flyers. And I think that's one thing that you can see already happening, especially with the rookie camp. The rookie camp was very fast paced. It was very moving. They were always on the move. There was not hardly ever downtime. And I think the one thing the Flyers are really starting to focus on is that the team energy and the team focus of being able to play a full 60 minutes, no matter where you are, no matter what night you're in, no matter if you're playing on a back-to-back or a 3 days rest, that the team is going to be energized and ready on a nightly basis. And I think that's one thing that John Tortorella is really hammering home, and it's really making a difference. Now, when you get into that position, there's a lot of different things that are going to be problems when you get into camp, injuries, as we can see from Sean Couturier already, but there's also going to be a lot of room for opportunity, and those rooms for opportunity are a couple different battles that will be happening through Flyers training camp. The main battle that before what happened with Sean Couturier was going to be the third pair right-hand defenseman. Justin Braun was signed, brought back after being traded at the deadline last year. And I think that was a good move by the Flyers, especially because Justin really liked his time here. He's one of those guys, when he gets in one place, he doesn't really like to leave. And, it was hard for him to leave last year, especially going to the Rangers where there was no clear opportunity and he was more of a depth guy. But it's a good thing for him to come back because he knows the room. He knows the guy he's going to be playing against. And the funny thing about all of this is if you remember back to last season, Justin Braun was supposed to play with Cam York in this lineup. Then the Flyers at the last second signed Keith Yandel, and that's where it all changed. Then Ryan Ellis got hurt. Then it all moved even more where, Justin Braun got tasked at 35 years old playing top line minutes, where he did kind of better here than he did in New York. But he's 35 and his body can't really hold up to those minutes. However, when you start to look at the different aspects of what's going on in the locker room, you're gonna have a young pair up top. You're gonna have Ivan Provorov and Tony DeLangelo who are up top. Now that's a pairing that could have a lot of success, but it also could struggle a lot too, because both guys like to move the puck, both guys love to join the rush, and both guys will have to have a safety blanket for themselves, and they're going to have to know when's one's going, one's not, and that could cause a little bit of tension at the beginning, but it could work down the line. And this goes back to when you look at it last year when Tony DeLangelo was in Carolina. Tony DeLangelo was with Jacob Slavin in Carolina, and Jacob Slavin is probably one of the best two-way defensemen in the NHL right now. And when he goes now to play with Ivan Provorov, he has to take those teachings that he got last year from Jacob Slavin and hopefully help Ivan convert into that same thing. Because if he can have the same success that he had with Slavin last year, the Flyers actually did have a pretty good acquisition in Tony DeAngelo. Now, yes, there's a lot of baggage that comes with Tony DeAngelo, but when you have a high caliber player like that has owned up to his mistakes, he's trying to fix his mistakes, and he's trying to own up to his past, that's one thing that you have to give somebody a chance for. It's not a situation of, he's not somebody that is, full board, always going to say that. No, he's already apologized. He's came out and accepted it. He knows he did something wrong, and he's trying to better himself for it by learning. And that's the one thing where the Flyers are helping him with that, is because especially with the the feature they did on him last week, you could sense that, this is some place that he actually wanted to come because he's from South Jersey, because he grew up a Flyers fan, and because he knows a lot of the guys here, and he wanted to come help this team. Now, when you get into it even there, then you get into another defense pair that showed promise last year, but struggled mightily over the latter part of the season, and that was Travis Sanheim and everybody's favorite $25 million contract, Rasmus Ristolainen. And when you do that, that's the part about it that really homes at home, that the Flyers have a lot of pairings right now on defense that do not really mesh well if they're going bad. So if the Flyers defense is playing bad, and Tony DeAngelo and Ivan Perov are having a bad game, and Travis Sanheim and Rasmus Ristolainen are having an equally bad game, the Flyers are not going to have any success at all with those pairings. And that could lead to a little bit of an adjustment period where they can flip-flop them, mix and match, have a little bit of a period where they're flipping in between in periods in the game. And that's where you can see it, and especially when you look back in years past when Alain Vigneault used to take Travis Sanheim in the second period because he had a little bit more juice because of his body and his stamina, he was more of the guy that was being double shifted over Ivan Perov in the second period because of the long change. So when you really start to look at it, the key part to this battle of the third pair defenseman is that this guy isn't going to be like a normal third pair defenseman. He's going to have to play a good 15 to 16 minutes a night. And that's where I think Justin Braun fits perfectly, because he also helps your penalty kill. He also helps veteran leadership. And he's also already been in the room and he knows that room. And he's also been part of he's not going to be part of that old leadership group that he was following. He can be part of the new leadership group that's here. The next camp battle that'll be really important is the bottom six. And when you look at the bottom six aspect of what's going on, is that there's plenty of opportunity now for somebody that was not on the radar to make the roster in the bottom six. And whether that is a guy named like Tyson Forrester, a guy like Bobby Brink, who was possibly going to the AHL, or even somebody like camp invite Antoine Roussel, or another guy even like Artem Anisimov to play center down there, that you can have so many different options now because of an injury to Sean Couturier, because now that elevates everybody and it makes another spot for somebody else that wasn't going to be there. So when you really look at it, this bottom six kind of camp battle is really from the second line down, because you can put anybody anywhere. Like, say Morgan Frost doesn't play center and they put Anisimov there, and Morgan Frost plays the wing on the second line with somebody, say, like Scott Lawton or Kevin Hayes. And then you start to look at the options. So they have plenty of options for people to play up in the lineup, but it also opens up a bottom six role that is now a very key camp battle because of the injury to Sean Couturier. Now, everybody can know, we'll talk about this in a second, the center position is going to be another big battle, of course, because of now the Sean Couturier injury. But the last camp battle that is going to be the backup goaltender position. And I talked about this on Twitter a little bit when the rosters came out on yesterday, was that the Flyers did an interesting little thing when they invited their PTOs. They invited 3 goalies, of course, Meyer, who was with the rookie camp, but they invited Tyler Wall and Pat Nagel, who was with the Phantoms last year, on PTOs. Now, I can understand the Wall movement because Wall was split time last year between ECHL and ACHL as a younger guy, and that can fit very well with the ECHL and AHL being if they need a goalie at the AHL level. But when you have Troy Grosnick and Felix Sandstrom competing for the backup job in the NHL, and then the other one essentially going to be with Samuel Arison and Lehigh Valley, the Pat Nagel addition doesn't really fit for me. And especially because when you look at it, the Flyers went through 2 seasons now at the AHL level having 3 goalies down there, and it has not really panned out. And yes, injuries have happened, and a lot of the guys, Felix Sandstrom and then Arison last year, missed almost the whole entire season. But it's also in the line that these guys need to play down there while they're down there. And if you carry 3 goalies down there, that's kind of hard for them to play down there. Now, yes, Pat Nagel started at the ECHL level, but he really performed well when he was at the AHL level, and that's really why he stuck there. It really got him to the Olympics basically last season. So when you look at it, there's going to be a lot of interesting aspects to look at it, especially being, do the Flyers go young with Felix Sandstrom, who performed pretty well in his 3 starts last year, especially his NHL debut where he basically stood on his head and stole the point in Anaheim for Flyers. But it's also the point that you could go for a more veteran guy in Troy Grosek, he's played in the NHL before, but also he's been a career minor leaguer, which is something that, really hurts the Flyers, is that, if an injury to the goalie position happens, heaven forbid, there isn't really a clear line in sight to who an NHL caliber goalie is on this team. And that's something that is going to be even more disconcerting if an injury does happen to Hart, or an injury does happen to Felix Sandstrom, or an injury happen to Troy Grosek. They're going to be really thin there. They actually might have to make a move. And I think that's why they brought Pat Nagel, just in case, to have another body, just to keep guys, loose in motion, that they don't have to force stuff during training camp, but also have that extra body. So the last camp battle that is really important is the center position. And when you look at the center position at the moment, here are the centers that are on the Flyers roster. And the Flyers roster is consisted basically of guys that they were relying on to take another step, but also get healthy. And I don't know, you can remember back to last season in the closing interviews, GM Chuck Fletcher really homed in on the Flyers banking on Sean Couturier and Kevin Hayes being healthy and leading this team this year. Well, now half of that, 50% of that tandem is gone. More than likely for the first 3 months of the season, but probably even longer than that, because if he does have to have surgery. Then when you look at, there's no real other guy on this list that can play NHL caliber second line minutes. And when you can see that, I was talking about this today on Twitter, that you're not really, you can't embarrass yourself already more than you already have. And the thing about that is that Sean Couturier has an NHL body. He's 6'4", 200 pounds. When he plays first line minutes against the NHL's best, he competes hard, he's not getting pushed around, and he uses his body well enough that, that's what makes him one of the best two-way centers in the league. When you go to Morgan Frost now, tasked with making those same exact moves, same exact adjustments, same exact body movements, same exact everything, at 5'11", 180, that's a big difference. And that's a big, nightmare matchup for the Flyers, because you cannot be tasked with Kevin Hayes going out there on every single night, going against every single best line, every single best team's players by himself with no center health behind him. I mean, Kevin Hayes can only play so much, and not to mention Kevin Hayes is coming off an injury that basically took almost 2.5 years to figure out and finally get healthy. So when you really look at it, you cannot allow yourself to go into the season with basically Kevin Hayes as your one and only center because of that factor. Because if you lose Kevin Hayes, then you're in real trouble. Then you're in the situation where Scott Lawton, who will be more than likely the second line center headed into the season, will be your first line center. And then you'll be back in the exact same situation, but you'll have nobody on your roster to step in. Then Morgan Frost will essentially have to jump to that second line role. And it's one of those situations where, this is just poor execution of not only the cap, but roster management. The Flyers have not focused on the center position because they believed when they had Sean Couturier, when they had Claude Giroux, signing Kevin Hayes was the final piece there. Then also the addition of Nolan Patrick in 2017 during the second overall pick of the draft. They thought that the future was going to be Sean Couturier, Kevin Hayes, and Nolan Patrick. But, of course, as we've seen, injuries happen, trades happen, and now you're sitting here 5 years later after having all that starting in motion with Nolan Patrick, then Kevin Hayes in 2019, you're literally stuck with the one guy you signed to be the final piece, with the other two guys that you thought were going to be here are not here. And when you seriously put it all together, there isn't really much for them to do on the lines of how to make an adjustment, because there is nobody in the farm system that can immediately jump up. Yes, they've drafted extremely well over the past 3 drafts that have a couple of guys that could have a lot of great potential on this team, but they're not going to play this year. You can go back to an experimental Joel Farabee at center, which was a disaster last year because he was just so outmatched. That really showed what it took to be a top line guy, especially with his body. Joel Farabee is only 6 foot, 180, the same exact thing. He's a little bit taller than Morgan Frost, same exact weight though. And he couldn't last because he was getting out-battled and out-beaten by bigger, stronger, and the better guys in the NHL. So when you really look at it, the Flyers really need to figure out how to adjust this period of time because they need to find something. One guy I thought they could have went after, and the only guy literally left on the free agent market that made any sense was Alex Galchenyuk, who signed with the Colorado Avalanche down on PTO. Other than that, there isn't really anybody on the free agent market right now that has a chance to come in here and, be an impactful guy for this team because of their absence. There's 36-year-old Tyler Bozak, who is well past his prime, well past his playing age, can't play second line minutes anymore. And Brad Richardson, who, had a good year last year in Arizona, but, he's 37 years old and he hasn't played more than, I think, average 12 minutes in like 5 or 6 years. So when you really look at it, there's nothing the Flyers can do here that is really a difference maker. And they're going to have to go from within. And unless somebody really makes a big jump from within, there isn't really a clear line in sight here of how they're going to put this roster together. Especially because when you looked at the lineup and you looked at everything going in here, you're now essentially putting another smaller guy into your top 6. Remember, Travis Konecny, 5'11", Cam Atkinson, 5'9", Morgan Frost now, 5'11", Scott Lawton, 6'1", Sean Couturier was supposed to be 6'4". So when you start to look at those there's not really much size in the Flyers' top 6, which is going to be a big, big matchup problem for them because they're going to get bullied on a nightly basis in the top 6, the most important minutes of the night. And when you really look at it, there's no size. You're going to have a guy in James Van Riemsdyk who's going to be 6'3", bigger body, and Kevin Hayes. That's really all you're going to have in your top 6. You're going to have Joel Farabee, who's also 6'1". You're going to have Scott Lawton, who's 6'1". And then you're going to have Travis Konecny, who's 5'11". You're going to have Cam Atkinson, who's 5'9", and Morgan Frost, who's 5'11". There's really an issue here, and especially as you can see, and especially in the drafting and their philosophy, especially with as Buff Flair has said over the past few drafts, they want size and skill. And when you really look at the Flyers right now, they have no size and they have no skill. And when you really get down into it, this is an issue that they're not going to fix overnight. They're not going to fix before training camp starts. They're not going to fix 3 days into the season. They're not going to fix a month into the season. They're not probably going to fix by the end of the season. And we're going to be sitting here in the offseason again, back to square one of how this is. Now, there's also things that could go into this season. The Flyers were already going to be, I estimated, a bottom 5 to 7 team, even with Sean Couturier on the roster. But now you're really starting to talk into a situation where the Flyers could possibly be in the bottom 3 to 4 teams of this year, where there is a very, very high level, high talented, generational player in this draft. And this brings up the fact of what happens when this season starts to turn. And we're sitting here in training camp now talking about the 2023 draft. That's not something you should be talking about. But in reality, there's no other thing to talk about, because at the moment right now, and I talked about this on Twitter yesterday afternoon, Sean Couturier's injury is going to buy Chuck Fletcher another year. There's no physical possibility or way that you can put anything on Chuck Fletcher. And Charlie O'Connor wrote a great article on this today. Chuck Fletcher has done moves that any GM would make at the time. 2 years later, 3 years later, 4 years later, do you really think anybody at that time, including Chuck Fletcher, could have predicted the outcomes of what has happened? Kevin Hayes being injured, Sean Couturier now being injured, Ryan Ellis being injured, having to trade his captain, having to go through 3 dreadful seasons. Could anybody predict that? Could anybody really predict that when that was happening? And that's the point that a lot of people are really not really understanding, is that, you can put a lot on Chuck Fletcher, but the one thing you can't put on him is you cannot put on him the outcomes. You can put on him for being aggressive. You can put on him for maybe going after being too aggressive, but you cannot put the outcomes of what has happened, because you cannot predict these. These are phenomenon things that have literally struck the Flyers every single season. So I'll leave you with this. Flyers training camp starts on Thursday. We'll go through everything next week on the podcast of going through all the lines, going through everything. We might have a special episode this weekend after training camp is over. But what we're going to really now see is how this team's going to be orchestrated, especially playing 2 games early next week on Saturday and Tuesday. We'll see how this team's being orchestrated. We'll see how this team is playing. And we'll actually get to see the coaching style that John Tortorella wants to play by. Because one main thing that really hasn't been, talked about, and we can't really see that until game action gets in, is how John Tortorella is really going to play this season. Is John Tortorella really going to fight for every single point? Or are we going to actually see a head coach focus on youth, focus on getting another year out of guys that can taking a next step and hoping for the next year? We will see what happens. This has been the Ripple the Twine podcast. We'll see you next time.